Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Gable. I'm the director of the assessment office at the Clover Park School District. I'm also a WERA board member and the organizer of the WERA Remote Learning Series. Welcome to part 3 of the Remote Learning panel series titled Identifying English Language Learners in the Virtual Classroom. This session is a WERA sponsored session, just like all of them. And I want to talk a little bit about WERA before we start. So WERA has been recognized as a forum for teachers, building and district leaders and scholars with a shared passion for applying the lessons learned for educational research. For 35 years, we have partnered with OSPI to host an annual conference to share cutting edge studies, research, foster dialogue, and build community. This year, our challenge is to continue this service for you with online programming until we are confident that it will be safe to return to an in-person professional development that we all know and love at the Hilton or wherever we're going to be at some point soon. The WERA board is hard at work to address these challenges for the start of our 2021 membership year in September. Keep in mind, we're going to reach out to you with information next month about this, and please consider supporting WERA with your membership and participation in events such as these. Today's panel consists of several people. I really want to thank all of them for making time to come here and to talk about this subject. We have Veronica, Leslie, and Amy from OSPI. We got Heather Richardson's from the Spokane Public Schools, Tracy Haddad from Evergreen Public Schools, Michelle Tessier from the Edmonds School District, Lee Stark from Tukwila, Jenny Antrobus from Kent, and the discussion is going to be moderated by my good friend who I always go to with any questions I have about ELL, Will Williams, who's the Director of Multilingual Education at Kent School District. Before we start, a few little netiquette pieces here. If you would, please mute your mic. Turn off your camera if you are not a panelist or a moderator so that we can all see all the panelists. If you have questions, we welcome them. Type them into the chat box. That chat box is going to be monitored. All questions will be reviewed, and probably most of them will get to the panelists today. If you have ideas you want to share with OSPI or with WERA, also type those into the chat box. We'll be reviewing those as well. All right, and your thoughts will get shared. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Will Williams, the Kent School District.
All right, thanks, Brian. Thanks everyone for joining us. I know that the question has been on everyone's mind. How do we do our ALPA 21 screening? Will we be actually screening folks? Will we need to do this in person? Can it be done online? All of those questions have been milling around every district. And so our impetus for bringing this panel together today was to answer those questions so that we all have enough information to be able to move forward and just kind of lower that affective filter for everyone. So as we are hearing from our presenters, if you would please type any questions in the chat box. Those of us on the panel will be answering them in the chat, and then we'll also relay some messages to our guests for answers. All right, so let's go ahead and let's queue up and go ahead and start with Veronica and Amy and Leslie. And let's get our slideshow queued up. Go ahead and just be thinking, what questions do you have? What questions have you heard in your district? What's kind of, under the surface there, milling around that you want to get answered today? What is your why for attending this? And go ahead and put that in the chat box so we can get started with our answering our questions.
Okay, hi everyone. It's Veronica Gallardo, so happy to be here with you all. Thank you for the invitation. This has been quite a bit of work that we've been doing to make sure we provide information that's meaningful to you all. So here we are. Just want to make sure everyone can see this, correct? All right. So the first thing I want to share with you is the fact that Leslie, Amy, and I have worked pretty diligently these last few weeks to try to get information and resources out across the state. That said, there are quite a few things that are pending approval from leadership. And so while I'm giving you snippets today, please know that these 4 bullets are really what we are talking about today. And specifically, we'll come out with more in-depth guidance this Friday, we hope. The challenge right now, again, at OSPI is that we want to make sure that everyone gets information, but we don't want you all to have information all at once at the same time on multiple topics. So I'm expected to have mine released on Friday. They have it in the queue quite some time, so we will be able, once it's approved, to send it out to delivery and a variety of other systems. So the first thing is the guidance for identifying multilingual English learners. Much of what Will mentioned is in fact one of the biggest questions we have across the state. So I will share with you exactly what we are doing. It's a 1-page template that we will be referring to, but please know, again, everything is pending approval. So we don't anticipate any issues. It's just, again, we don't have final approval. The welcome letter template, we thought that it would be very helpful to provide a letter template to all of you around what exactly you should tell your parents, what you wish to tell your parents, and we put it in a template format. I'll speak to all of those. And the reopening Washington school guidance, specifically to reopening, providing you with more resources. And then Amy will be speaking to CEDAR's updates. And then Leslie has a piece of information that's very important too around your environment. So here we go. Now, I thought just for clarity's purpose, it's really important to talk about what are our non-negotiables at OSPI when we are working with school districts, with all of you across the state. And as you can see, they are not any new non-negotiables. Those are really all our civil rights obligations that we refer to when we're talking about identification of English language learners, language development services with qualified staff, meaningful access to content without unnecessary segregation, program evaluation. We know that's going to look very different this time, and we're okay. We're going to be very flexible working with all of you. And then language access for parents. All of those are our non-negotiables, and we will support you and work with you in any way we can. So know that's important. Now here's what everyone's asking about, right? So what are we doing? What exactly is it that we're doing in regards to identifying potential EL students? So we've decided to try to make it as simple as possible. The first thing we want you to know is that when administering the home language survey, we've decided not to add more to you, right? So look at that far left-hand column. If our students, and Amy, I'm going to ask you to help me if I miss a piece. If our students answers questions 2 and 3, then you follow down to the left column with that arrow. And then what we've done differently this year is, well, some parts. So step 1, using the home language survey, you will identify possibly eligible students, depending on how they answer questions 2 and 3, and within 10 days, provide services to the potential EL students, right? Depending on if they answered yes to questions 2 and 3.
Veronica, can I interrupt for just a second?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are putting in the chat that they can't see the screen. Can you put your slideshow in presentation mode? It looks like
I thought it was in presentation mode. Let's double check.
It's in
home language survey. We know that, or the how to identify EL students, right? So we know things are going to be very different. And what everyone does have to do is administer the home language survey, right? And depending, again, looking at that far left-hand column, depending on how folks or students are responding to questions 2 and 3 with a yes, then you follow those arrows down all the way to the left-hand column. Where we've done things differently and where you have new information now is the first part, step 1, is the same, right? So you're providing English language development services to potentially EL students based on the answers to question 2 and 3, which is the first box in that top, and questions in the home language survey, right? The difference is, and you still have to provide, really important, services within 10 days. The students have to be enrolled in EL program within 10 days based on questions 2 and 3. The second part is where we've tried to do the best we can to offer flexibility. Historically, our state, unlike our federal requirements, our state has said you have to administer the assessment within 10 days as well. So when we say the assessment, it is the placement screener. We are saying, let's allow for flexibility. Let's shift that state requirement to 30 days, right? So that is where the big exception comes in. The exception, there's no exception of providing EL services within 10 days, right? So you ask questions 2 and 3 if you can't completely commit to the home language survey. And then step 2 is within 30 days, you administer the assessment, right? The placement assessment. Now, we're going to get tons of questions about what about those districts that are choosing to do a hybrid model. If your district is open based on what the health department says and your superintendent says, right, and your school board, we will always defer to what your health department says. We will not provide guidance or recommendations for you to administer any type of the language assessment outside of what your health department deems is safe for the students. So if by chance 30 days comes and goes, then all we ask is that you inform us at the state level that the 30 days window has not been met because of the healthcare authority's determination that it's still not safe for students to return to school. Okay, so big difference here. Questions 2 and 3 are your focus. You still have to provide services to, within 10 days of enrollment to possible eligible students. And instead of 10 days to administer the placement assessment, you have a total of 30 days.
How do we inform you
Great question. So that would be the directors of districts or whoever is the lead EL person. We have the contact information at the very end of this presentation that you would just send an email to Amy or Shannon. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next piece, the next page, and we'll get to your questions. Should I answer questions, Will, now or wait?
I would say that there are quite a few questions just for clarification in terms of people saying, so based on the screener or based on the HLS questions 2 and 3, we are placing students in service. And the answer is yes. 100%
yes.
Yep.
And we will get in a moment, Amy will speak to, okay, great, that's wonderful, but then how do you change your CEDARS information to have that reflect temporary status? We will get to that for you. We have that all figured out for you.
Right, and we'll also get to all the questions about, well, what happens when we go to hybrid or when we go back to school. We'll get to those too.
Absolutely. Okay. So somebody has control of this document, so I need the next page. Great. So we thought it would be very helpful to create a parent letter template that explains the ELPA 21 annual assessment, because that was impacted. And what we really, this is just again a sample because I don't have it approved, but the key topics here that we mentioned in that letter is that we wanted to make sure families know that it was interrupted due to school closures, that the incomplete tests offered little information about a student's actual abilities, even though we know that some students completed all 4 domains, there's quite a few that did not, right? And OSPI does not recommend looking for comparisons across districts or across the state, right? Aggregate data is not going to be accurate enough and will be misleading if you do that. So please, please, please. Families should consider multiple pieces of evidence this coming year, or any year really, regarding their child's language progress, in addition to the ELPA 21 scores, and so on. So we wanted to have this shell letter that we'll translate it and have it available in at least the top 5 languages. That's the least we can do, and get that out to you. But again, all of this will be in the ELL guidance, the multilingual English learner guidance that we are waiting for approval on. But we thought it would be helpful to get a template out to you for parents. Next page. reopening guidance. So here's the one that we thought, you know, there's lots of questions and lots of people asking quite a few things. So what do we have as a part of a consortium that we work with CCSSO and other states across the district? So we've been pulling and identifying resources and materials that we find very helpful. So we have other examples, and this is just an example of resources that will be available in the reopening guidance document specific to multilingual English learners. So again, this is just a snippet, an example of what's available. Next page. So I'm looking at all the questions, I'm getting distracted. Reopening guidance, same thing for migrants, right? So we have quite a few. We're number 2 in the nation for migratory students. And so there's going to be lots of information and resources. And at the federal level, there's quite a bit of information available. So again, that is going to be available to you all in reopening guidance for migrant education students. Just a reminder that 40% of our migratory youth are also EL students. So it's going to be useful to look at both sets of resources. Next page. And then here's the resource. Who are you going to send your information regarding that you missed the 30-day, you were not able to provide the assessment during the 30-day deadline? Well, that's Shannon Martin and Amy Ingram. Amy is your person to go to if you're in the central or eastern part of Washington, and Shannon is northwest, right? All of this area over here by SOSP in Olympia. Okay, questions now. Or should we go into Cedars?
I'm sorry.
Should we go into Cedars, or do we do?
No, let's hang here for a second. There's still a little bit of confusion about the 30 days and when that starts and why and all of that stuff.
Okay, all right. So.
And maybe we can go back to that flow chart while you talk.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
People can have that visual.
All right. Amy, I'm going to have you speak to this. She's had over 50 meetings on assessment. So Amy, would you speak to this?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. The part that's the same is we're going to give every child who registers for school in Washington the home language survey, and we're going to scrutinize questions 2 and 3 to see if they are identifiable as a bilingual or multilingual student. We've always done that process, so that part won't be any different. The part that is different this year is that if we are doing that from a district that is 100% operating in a remote capacity or a distance learning capacity, we would not give the ELPA screener to that child until the local health department and the local school board determine that it's safe to offer some in-person services. When the date that those in-person services begin are the date that's the starting date for the 30-day timeline. So once that decision is made and it's issued as a decision, 30 days from there, you would need to have completed the ELPA screener, and then you would go back in and amend CEDARS, and I'm going to speak to the CEDARS amendments here in a minute. But just to reiterate, we are not advocating that any district test while they are shut down. We don't have the authority to do that, and it would be unwise to do that. We are saying that the student should receive services on a provisional basis within 10 days, but the screener may wait until 30 days after you have in-person services for your district.
Amy, can I just clarify with you, because recently the governor and superintendent had talked about even if you're fully online, maybe you would have some small groups coming in, some special education students or students with other needs. Are you talking about a full hybrid program, or would those small groups also entail in-person services as far as 30 days is concerned?
Sure thing. My understanding, and unless this is changed by the cabinet, my understanding is that those are in-person services, whether or not they are scheduling instructional hours on their campuses, that they do have the health department approval and school board approval to begin some in-person services. Then we would say that the testing timeline would begin at that time.
That's correct.
Amy, I'm going to ask a clarifying question. We can do in Spokane in-person instruction for ELL and special ed, which is why we have started screener testing.
Yes.
What if we run across cases where we have a kid or a family that's being quarantined and we move beyond the 30 days because of that situation? Is it okay if we just email you specific students with an explanation?
Yes, we would ask for you to email us and make sure that we're aware of that, and we would help you to document that. Know that we are looking to see all of our districts successful, and we do want to help make sure that we are all documenting that everybody moved forward the best that they could during this situation. I think that what that will mean in the long time is still going to be worked out, but we do respect the family's right to keep their child well, and especially if the child might have symptoms, we need to have a process in place for that. So we're not looking to take some type of punitive approach with a district if that's the case, and we would want you to contact us and let us know that it was happening so we could advocate on your behalf.
Thank you.
So Amy, there's a few questions, and Veronica, about where do we place students? Depending on the program model that your district uses, you may have different program structures or models for students who are beginners, for students who are intermediate, etc. So what is your advice on how those students should be placed?
Veronica, do you want to speak to that?
That's a good question. I mean, so at the state level, we lead system-wide, right? And because every district has different ways of doing the designed instruction, it would really be determinant on the districts to really make those decisions. That could be through the use of designing or creating an informal assessment that goes beyond asking questions 2 and 3 or the home language survey. But again, because we're serving over 300 and some districts, that's an independent district decision that folks would have to make.
We do have some guidance on what sources districts might use to inform those decisions that will be published when the guidance document is approved.
Yes, and we actually have quite a few more coming in from CCSSO. They've given us examples of what other states are doing regarding placement and so on. So we'll be sharing that as soon as we're able to as well. But again, we're not making those decisions. Those are district level decisions.
Veronica, there were a couple questions in the chat box about the 2019-2020 scores and if you were able to administer the test before schools closed. Are we going to use those scores on the letters, or if students exited, are we still counting them as exited students?
So we are not exiting any students, right? It's just not possible. So we are keeping, and I'll be working with our financial folks here at OSPI to let them know our numbers are expected to be inflated, and as such, funding will follow that for this year. The other piece is that can you repeat the question? Because I only answered question 1, part 1.
Oh, no, I was actually thinking about the letter, and it said, what sources did you use? Like, we're supposed to put in what kind of progress we think that they've made.
Yeah. So
last year, if we had them.
So in our, so it depends, right? So when we're talking about that letter, it's individual, student-based, right? So there's no problem in putting partial or complete assessment data in that. What we are really trying to stress is that we don't ask folks to look at the aggregate data. It's just not correct. And of course, across the state, we're looking at districts having higher completion rates than other districts, right? So it varies all over the state. And while we have 94% of our students, or 90 to 94% of our students took the assessment, what we don't really have is an easy way to find out which areas were completed. No, that's not true. Amy, help me again. So we know that 90 to 94% of our students completed a portion of the annual assessment.
Yes.
Correct?
It is harder for us to see which domains were force entered because they were timed out due to the school closures, rather than those who actually did finish answering all of the questions for each domain. In our conversations with student information, the most recent estimate was that approximately 80% had completed. We are cautioned with our aggregate data not to make any conclusions based on the aggregate data, specifically because it's not a random sample of students in a district. It's the test is usually administered by grade level. And so that will kind of tilt the scores that are received towards grade bands over other grade bands. And that makes it so less uniform that we can't make meaningful conclusions from it.
Okay.
So, and just so you know, Amy, and I don't exaggerate, has been in over 50 meetings with student assessment folks. We've been going over this over and over again, and that's why she really is our go-to person. So if you continue to have quite a few very specific questions around that, Amy is your go-to person because she's met across our system at OSPI to have conversations to try to really get these answers for you. And it has been arduous in that we've really tried to make sure that we've gotten one common answer, and that's taken some time. But Amy's your person to go to.
Veronica, can I ask one clarifying question?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question. Hi, Tracy.
Hi. So the question was, you said we weren't exiting any students. Do you mean for the 1920 school year or the 2021 school year?
So for the 1920 school year, where the students took the end of year assessment, we are not able to exit those students. So those numbers of the students who continued on in 2021, we will keep those numbers and we will not be exiting students.
So even students who completed the test, we're not exiting those students.
That's a good question. I didn't ask about that piece. Amy, do you have an answer to that one?
My understanding, and I will definitely verify this, I think that we are still in a place of understanding what the data can tell us and cannot tell us, but my understanding is that if they have completed all of the domains and they have a score to exit, they may be exited. The numbers, though, of that group of students are very, very different statewide than we normally see them. One visualization I glanced at, and I need to study this more, but one of the visualizations showed that it was 2.5 times different than the normal rate that we see for students who exit. So we do anticipate different numbers in our programs, but my understanding was that we are exiting students who completed all 4 domains and exited. I do know that Lucas is in our group today if we wanted to clarify any of that information with him.
That's been our message from assessment the whole time, is if you have scores of a student who would qualify to be exited in a different year, then they can also exit this year. I mean, based on the spring 2020 scores. If those scores are exited, are proficient or scored proficient.
So if they completed all 4 domains, they got scores of all 4s and or 5s, then they have transitioned out.
Yes.
Yeah.
But those are the ones that have completed all 4 domains. So those students will be exited out, but there are so many more that have not completed all 4 domains. So those are the students that we are not exiting out, and that will then require me to have conversations with our budget office to figure out how we continue to support and financially those students.
So just to make one clarifying statement, because there's a lot of chat in the chat box about this. Once again, if students completed the entire ELPA 21, all 4 domains,
Correct.
They were successful in achieving scores of 4 and or 5 in all 4 domains, and you've already exited them because you already rolled your student data system, you're good to go. You don't have to go put those kids back in because they are exited per the usual process.
That's exactly correct.
All right.
Good questions.
Okay.
Keep them coming.
Chat
I know
box
this is
back down.
challenging.
Awesome. Okay. There are also a lot of questions about CEDARS, and I know Amy's going to talk about CEDARS in a moment, but are there any other questions regarding screening or using the HLS to identify students. If there are, go ahead and put those in the chat. And anyone who's on the panel, including myself, Leslie, Veronica, Abby, Tracy, Jenny, we'll go ahead and answer those, and then we'll move on and see what Amy has to share with us about CEDARS.
So just to clarify, we should be getting examples of assessments we could use with secondary students as of this Friday when the other materials are released, so that districts who've never had any kind of in-house assessment of kids will be able to see what other districts you said were using around the nation, so that we can know what level to put our kids in. Is that what you'd said?
No. So we work with our CCSSO, and in there we have other states across the nation provide some guidelines or information and resources of what they're doing during this COVID time. So it's not specific examples of what different types of assessments that they're using, informal assessments. It is just, you know, communications, it's letters on how to work with families during this COVID time, things like that that are more generic than informal assessments, a variety of informal assessments.
So then OSPI wants districts to create that kind of assessment prior to, I guess, the enrollment of kids?
We're saying that it is the district's decision to determine if they do need to have an additional informal assessment to help them determine a potentially temporary placement in their types of programs they have in their district. That's what we're saying, right? We're not mandating anything around that. We're saying at the state level, we ask that you have questions 2 and 3 determine your possible eligible student placement, place them within 10 days. Beyond that, it is each district's purview to determine how they're going to do that. We're not that directive.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, Amy, are you ready for me to stop sharing so you can share?
I am. Let me give it a try. So
Okay, here we
all
go.
ready. Let's see what happens.
We can help you for sure.
Oh,
There we go.
can you see the presentation? Because I can't see it.
No. Yes.
Let me see if I can put it in.
Yeah, we've got your notes too.
Oh no. How about there? Is that better?
Mhm.
There are a variety of reopening plans, and that's required a new process for reporting enrollments in CEDARS. The process needed to be flexible enough to describe each scenario for reopening, but dynamic enough to reflect our return to the buildings. We worked with student information, data governance, and the assessment team to create a CEDARS protocol that has passed the initial trials so far, and we believe that it'll interface well with the local student information systems. We believe that this process is responsive to the various stages of reopening, able to house data collected traditionally and provisionally, and flexible enough to allow entries to be extracted or merged at a later time. We have developed and will soon make available, we hope, step-by-step instructions for how to create the entry that best describes the situation in which each student is enrolled. Once it's approved, it'll become part of the CEDARS manual and will be communicated out through GovDelivery. And it really does describe exactly what to enter field by field. We will be able to create entries for students qualified under a provisional status. This is for your districts that are not able to do the ELPA screener in person yet. This process is similar to what happens when a student moves from one district to another and is enrolled before their records arrived in the new district. Most importantly, it has the functionality of being merged with a permanent entry later or extracted for students who don't qualify when the ELPA becomes available. We had initial concerns about PENR, but we think those have been resolved. Some important aspects of the provisional entry are that it is only for use when the ELPA screener cannot be conducted safely. a temporary submission that allows provisional participation and uses the same bulk codes statewide to indicate that testing has not yet been conducted. As it becomes safe to assess students in person, the original entry will be amended to reflect that the status has been confirmed through the ELPA screener, which is the legal mechanism for this verification. This also documents moving away from the emergency rule and toward the existing legislative language. It's always better to move in that direction as soon as it's safe to do so. Some important features of this process are that it is for use when the ELPA screener had been delayed but has now been administered. Districts will follow steps to amend the provisional status entry, and specific instructions are provided to merge duplicate entries or to report tested but did not qualify. If districts are providing in-person services and are able to test, they may enter information into CEDARS according to the normal process. Over time, all entries will need to shift toward the traditional entry as it becomes safe to test in person. Only field J13 will reflect that a student had been served under provisional status. All other fields will eventually display as they have historically. One last thought, though we have studied the assessments that protect these student rights heavily since last March, we cannot see this process from your vantage. If you run into any difficulty whatsoever, we would want to hear from you sooner rather than later. And our team is deeply invested in seeing our district successful. So we do welcome that contact if anything comes up. I guess now we could probably see if there are questions about CEDARS, preliminary questions, but knowing that more guidance is on the way.
So Amy, one question from Brian. Is the CEDARS team talking with SIPSI and other student information system vendors? Do you know?
We are, so yes, student information assessment has been talking with the local stakeholders with their student information systems, and we've done some trial runs of how those entries would work. They seem to be, the plan seems to be successful so far, but of course, as we all know, everybody who's present here today, when we roll out something statewide, things happen, many things happen, and we're right here ready to work on any things that come up, but it looks good from this, at this stage, very solid.
Excellent, thank you. Leslie, you haven't chimed in a whole lot during this presentation. Are there other things that you want to add?
I think on my part, there's not a lot that's changed about the screener and administering the screener, and we are working with our vendor, Cambium Assessments, to develop opportunities for remote learning or remote administration, but that's not ready, and it's not going to be ready at the beginning of the school year. We are hopeful for summative testing, but we don't really have a timeline for that at this moment. I see people asking about February and March and summative testing in the chat, and really it's 2020. We can't be thinking that far ahead and making an accurate assessment of what's going to happen in February, but we will keep you up to date as we know things and as decisions are made. We will absolutely be communicating that as efficiently and effectively as we can. On the test administrator training, it's available for districts that need to be administering the screener. That inside that training are some suggestions from OSPI on how to do that more safely. It's not, it's, you know, you don't have to wear a hazmat suit kind of thing, but there are ideas around making sure you have good air circulation and just some things to keep in mind. As you're probably focused more on the administration, also think about the environment that you're testing in. I did want to point out that we do still, I don't think we've mentioned yet, but we do still accept out-of-state tests for ELPA 21 states, and that has not changed. So if you have a student coming from Oregon that was tested and you can get those scores, even if they were tested 3 years ago and showed proficient, we still accept that. And so those students would still fall under that out-of-state ELPA 21 score policy and process. And then I've seen a couple of questions in the chat around receiving the ISRs for spring testing. That is scheduled. They are scheduled to be arriving in districts on August 20th. Some of you may have heard that things are being delayed through the US postal system these days. So, you know, checks in the mail, so to speak, on that one. They will be sent, they will be available. They should be arriving around the 20th, but it might be a few days or a week later, depending on how your how things are arriving in your area. But
Leslie and Amy,
and
I have a question regarding
someone is talking and I can't tell what they're saying.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
One question I had that kind of came up that I haven't gotten an answer to is, before, if we're like, say for example, a student transfers from Seattle to Spokane as an example, and they took part of the ELPA 21 annual assessment last year, or were identified through CEDARS last year. Typically, if they haven't taken an assessment in a year, we would need to screen them again. If they were in the system last year or took part of the assessment last year, will we need to rescreen, or could we just qualify them?
Veronica and Amy, I don't know if we've answered that question yet.
We haven't. That's a first
internally.
time question that requires conversation. So it sounds like a fabulous idea, but I will get back to you once I take that up the ladder. Yeah.
It looks like there are a few questions still about the 30-day timeline. So my understanding from you was that the 30-day timeline with the students begins once there are any students who are returning on site. That will then, whether it's a small number or a large number, that will initiate that 30-day must start. You have 30 days now to proctor the assessment, the screener. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then the other follow-up question to that I'm seeing, is it 30 school days or 30 calendar days? Is it from enrollment, or is it from when the kiddo starts school?
We are basing that on the ESSA language, so it's 30 calendar days.
30 calendar days, okay. And from the enrollment date or from the start date? Those can be different.
From the date that the student, the district provided in-person services.
Okay. Thank you.
From when they did in person, if we start kids, we put them in program and then get to go back to hybrid, we could then test them. So I'm not sure what you're saying. We would have 30 days once we started in person before we would have to test them, no matter what time of the year they came?
You would need to finish that testing within the 30 days after you first provided in-person services.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have another really good question. Can we opt to screen students online?
I can answer that one. I got it.
Yep.
No. There is no way to remote screen a student using the ELPA 21 screener.
And thank you for clarifying that, because a lot of people had the idea that they could just share their screen with the student, and that is, it's not secure. It's not a way to test. Wow.
Don't do that.
Please do not do that. That is 100% no.
That's a hard no.
We're not even gonna, like, well, in these situations, nope. All situations. No, no, no.
All right, and there's a lot of what if questions that are very specific to your own local context. And that's kind of why we're all gathered here today, to hear the same information and then to take it back in our local context and to be able to discuss it with our teams in terms of creating a plan. There are a whole bunch of non-negotiables, right, that have already been iterated. And we'll make sure that we, like Veronica said, not all of this guidance has been approved to issue to school districts yet. But once that comes out, then it will be super ultra clear to everyone. But you're getting a sneak preview here so that you can start thinking about that and planning in your own local context. Let's see. Panel members, team members, are there any other things that stand out to you?
It looks like people have asked about if your school were to go back to a hybrid model or you start having students in school again, but some families decided to keep their child home 100%, that is a situation where we would then contact Amy or just communicate that to OSPI, correct?
Yes, I'm happy to keep records of that so that we have some type of documentation that that was outside of what districts were advised to do, because that wouldn't be something that you could choose if the parent had chosen something else. So we would look into it at that time. But yes, do feel welcome to let me know that, and I will keep records of it.
I have a clarifying question on the 30 days. I see some comments. I don't know if there's some confusion, but just like when we did the 10-day, the 30-day is for that individual student. It's not a 30-day just because we had a small group of kids receiving services. The individuals, we have 30 days to test those individual students that are starting services back in the building. It doesn't mean that we have 30 days to also get to the rest of the EL students that are not coming back. It's the individual, correct?
Absolutely, it is definitely the individual.
We also have a couple questions about parent letters.
They should be on the website.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously the parent letters will look a little different this time, but definitely there.
Is there a deadline to send those out?
Typically 30 days. I believe that's the language in ESSA, but I would need to check it.
Veronica, it looks like there is some confusion when you say individual students. So is it that the individual student has to be one of the students that is getting some kind of in-person services, or if the school district is offering any kind of in-person services to any student, then students, that's the 30-day window for anyone who needs to be screened. That's when that 30-day window starts.
So yeah, let me restate it. So
yeah, please.
Again, remember, our first and foremost information around when students can get to school to do the assessment, be a small group or big group, is based on what the health department says, right? So our students have to have, there will be students who opt out and families who opt out not to go to school even though the schools are open, right? So that 30-day window starts when you have access to the student, and it falls under the guideline of the health department, right? We don't get to write the rules, we don't get to make exceptions, and obviously the student health is first. Amy, anything else to add to that? They seem to understand you so much better.
Just on this one topic maybe, but I've been able to devote my whole workday for months to this topic. So that's the only reason. So that is my understanding, because we can't make it a blanket rule that the district opens and then they screen all students within 30 days, because some districts are going to open in a way that they have two groups of students that start at alternate times. So if one group of students doesn't start for 2 or 3 weeks after the first group starts, it would not be feasible or equitable to say that that original 30 days should apply to that latter group that starts school. So it needs to apply to when the child comes for in-person services.
And so when we reference individual, that's what we mean by the individual.
Okay, so can I just state that as some of these people on the chat have been writing, they're looking at starting some small groups for, it sounds like some of the more significantly disabled students or impacted students, which may not include their English learners necessarily in these groups. And so if it's only open to those, say, 100 students out of their 40,000 students, we would not start the 30-day until we do more of a hybrid kind of situation, or we have specifically English learners coming in for services. Is that what you're saying?
That is what we're saying. So it is definitely the case that we mean to say that 30 days should not start before we allow that specific child to present to the school. That wouldn't be reasonable on our end.
Hi, this is Elaine from Fife. Can I ask a question that I think might clear up a bunch of questions I see in the chat window?
Sure.
Thank you. So we all know that we have parent notification letters, and there's templates on OSPI's website, and we already see them there. Veronica, you added a different dimension today of talking about this new kind of a welcome shell letter. That, if I'm understanding you correctly, that would be in addition, it would accompany the normal parent notification letters that we normally send home. Is that correct?
That's correct. So first, that's correct, and it's an optional letter. It's only a tool or a resource if districts choose to use it. We were trying to be proactive.
Thank you so much. So we could have our staff already downloading and making copies of the parent letter that's currently on the website. This other letter is just an optional piece to add to it because of the unusual circumstances last spring.
That's correct. This other letter doesn't have specific student data in it. It's just more information, and again, it's optional. So
perfect. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right.
I have a quick
I'm
follow-up.
sure everybody is reading the chat box, and I want to just point out that there's a lot of good guidance in here. A lot of folks are sharing things that structures are putting together in their school district. So again, please scroll through and see what other folks have added to that and get some really good ideas. I know there was somebody who wanted to talk.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to start my video, but it says it says that my video can't be started by the facilitator. Anyway, it's okay. You don't want to see me, that's fine. No, I just had a quick follow-up question to the letter question. So there's not currently a letter that I can see that tells a parent that their child has been provisionally accepted to an EL program based on the home language survey. Is that something that the state would be developing?
No, it's not something that we've discussed or would be developing. Yeah.
Would you recommend that we inform a parent in some way that we're placing their child in services? Or we would be sending them the same letter, I guess.
You would be sending them the same letter. I mean, if you want to do an additional step forward, again, we leave that up to districts to make that determination.
So Veronica, are you saying the normal letter we send parents once they're done with the screener saying that they're identified for services, we should send that same letter for kids that we provisionally are going to serve until we can do the screener?
Yes, correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that letter that currently exists that doesn't reference the ELPA 21 in any way?
Yeah,
this was part of a meeting I did.
It was part of the PowerPoint presentation, right? And so that letter speaks to just informing families of the fact that it was an unusual testing period this year where across the state we have some students who completed the assessment, other students who didn't complete the assessment, right? And we just wanted to give them information around the interruption, or give you the option to give families information around the interruption of the ELPA 21 annual. So it doesn't give you specifics, but what it does say it gives you is a little bit of lines in the actual letter to add anything specific to make it personal as to what your district is doing.
Sorry, I was talking about the existing parent letter that says that a child is on or off of grade level in terms of their learning.
The new one.
The new one?
That was added.
Oh,
So before we go to that, I just want to acknowledge that it is 2:30, and I know some people may have to jump off, but if you can stay on and listen to Amy address this question, that'd be fantastic.
So this is the letter that's part of the PowerPoint presentation, correct?
I think he's referring to the update of the parent notification, the annual parent notification letters.
So that's not part of the PowerPoint. Okay.
Yeah, the one that says my child is, or the child is on grade level.
Yeah. So that letter, yeah, that letter was updated to meet the demands of ESSA earlier in the year. Actually, we got most of it approved before there was a school shutdown at all. And so we did go ahead and make that available. Some districts had already completed their with the letter from before, and so we're still trying to figure out what our response is, whether or not that needs to be redone. But my understanding was that we would not ask districts to redo the letter. I need to check on that to make sure, but the new letter reflects the demands of ESSA, and it's just that we happen to get that letter updated as it should have been. And make it available before we realized there would be a pandemic. So the arrival might seem like another burden or task that we're adding to districts, and that was completely unintentional on our part, just that it had been made available kind of before this all happened.
And I think the biggest question with that is, what tool are we using statewide to determine whether or not a student is on grade level?
So ESSA doesn't speak to that, and it doesn't mandate that we use a formalized assessment piece. Certainly, districts could look at the SBA scores in years where that was administered. This year, we don't have the luxury of SBA scores to do that. And so for districts that have chosen to implement that as their parent notification letter, we've talked about some things that might be meaningful, such as grades, other assessments districts might use to as kind of these interim assessments, that sort of thing. ESSA does not have a mandate for it to be a standardized assessment in the way that it mandates other things. It just asks the question.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I think that's been the buzz ever since that came out. And the fact that districts might use different measures to show whether a kid is on grade level or not is okay.
From our standpoint, it is, and ESSA doesn't seem to speak to that, so we would assume that that would be fine as well.
Awesome.
Okay, guys, this is Brian Gable chiming in again. Time is 2:33, 3 minutes over. Out of respect for the panelists' time, because we're all very busy during this time, I'd like to wrap this session up, but I do acknowledge that there are a lot of questions that are still out there. Keep in mind, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, if you do have questions, we're going to leave this session open. You can type your questions in the chat, and this chat history is going to be shared with all the panelists and OSPI so that they can think about some of the concerns that you have and address those in future resources. Will, thank you so much for moderating this discussion. Abby, Tracy, Leslie, Jenny, Veronica, Amy, Heather, Michelle, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this session. You're great panelists. I learned a lot. If you would like a copy of this presentation, it's going to be available maybe before a week from today. But Brian Rick, who's the WERA president, has been working really hard on this presentation, on just getting all of these things out to our members. And we'll be sending an email to you with more information on how you can access the materials, PowerPoints, and so forth that were presented here. But things may change from day to day, so always look for the most recent PowerPoints and resources from OSPI.